Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. How much money do you need to retire at 35 and live on investment income alone until the age of 90? This is an article that I recently ran across from Business Insider. And this is a very clickable topic, right? The idea of retiring very young, not have to work anymore, and just sort of ride off into the sunset and do whatever you want in life. In fact, I love how this article starts. Most Americans have been in the working world for at least a decade by the time they reach their mid-30s. For some people, that's enough. And honestly, it just made me chuckle a little bit as I read this because I'm 36. I'm the age they're talking about here. And realistically, a lot is happening in your 30s. You're in the midst of building your life or maybe building a family, and that can come with a whole slew of stressors. And that can make the idea of just kicking back and relaxing pretty darn appealing. But on the flip side, your 30s are still really young. And if you think about having to fund the next 60 years into your 90s, it does seem like a bit of a long shot. It's unlikely that you're going to be able to fund those next 60 years successfully if you retire at 30. But for the sake of conversation, let's dive into this. And it's worth noting that these numbers are actually based off a Monte Carlo simulation for different portfolios that you would need for two different income streams. The author did it for an annual income stream of $100,000 and an annual income stream of $65,000. If you were to retire at the age of 35 with the intent of simply living off your investment income until the age of 90, you would need to have about $5.2 million invested to provide $100,000 a year annual income. If your goal was to have an annual income of $65,000, the nest egg needed at the age of 35 drops down to $3.3 million. Now, I think these are incredibly large sums of money, and the odds of any 35-year-old having these amounts saved up and invested is highly unlikely. I do really like that this example does suggest the various amounts you would need for an early retirement at the ages of 45 or 55 as well. And you can see that these amounts significantly decrease for each decade you're willing to work. Again, I'm not speaking to the probability of actually hitting these investable asset amounts at the age of 25, 35, or 45. I just think it's nice that they're presented here. I do think those numbers get far more realistic as you get towards the age of 55 or 65 as presented. Now, the numbers presented here are based off a single individual and how much that single individual would need invested to hit these income needs. I tend to use the saying, finance is personal, because there's so many factors to consider. And in that line of thinking, I think it's worth going over some of the assumptions that were used to get to these numbers. First, let's talk investment assumptions. It is assumed that all the investments are going to be held in a taxable brokerage account, which makes sense. If you're planning on leaving the workforce at, say, 35, a traditional 401k or even a Roth IRA aren't really going to be that helpful at that time period in life. Quite simply because of their age limits on when you can fully access the funds within them. If you're stepping away from the workforce at an extremely young age, you're going to want funds in an account that you can access freely without fear of any sort of penalties. It's worth considering that you might be doing yourself a disservice by not being able to take advantage of these tax-advantaged accounts. These tax-advantaged accounts are so wonderful because they allow your dollars to grow on either a tax-deferred or a tax-free basis, depending on whether you're using the traditional variety or the Roth variety. Because if you're simply using a traditional brokerage account, you will likely face taxes on an annual basis. Perhaps not if your income stays under a certain threshold, but if you do reach an income of, say, $65,000 a year or $100,000 a year, as suggested in this example, you will be subject to some level of capital gains tax. Consider what a $10,000 investment could grow to over 35 years if it was in a taxable account versus a tax-deferred account. Paying taxes on an annual basis can certainly inhibit the growth potential of a portfolio, which is what makes tax-advantaged accounts so attractive. But the assumptions being made aren't simply on account type. You also have to consider things like inflation. In this case, the author used an inflation rate of 3%. Then you have to consider the potential rates of return you could actually capture and how these funds are invested. In this situation, this author assumed that 80% were in equities and 20% in bonds. Then you have to consider things like portfolio turnover, because that's going to have tax consequences. You have to consider if you're working with an advisor who may charge a fee of assets under management, which would ultimately hurt your portfolio's growth potential. Then we have a whole slew of tax considerations. In this example, the author assumes that there's federal taxes, but no state or local taxes. He also assumes that the individual simply takes the standard deduction on an annual basis. Then we have to consider how the individual investments are taxed. When it comes to dividends, are they qualified or are they non-qualified dividends? The investments themselves, are they subject to long-term capital gains or short-term capital gains taxation? And then this example also does not include or factor in Social Security, because at 35, it's unlikely that this individual would be collecting Social Security. There are so many assumptions that you have to make in order to run a projection like this. I just feel like it's worth highlighting all of those assumptions so everyone understands why I might make a statement like finance is personal, or when you see other YouTubers in the finance space and they say they can't make specific recommendations off what seems like a simple question because there's so many factors at play. That's why all of this information that you read about for the mass media or you see videos about should be taken with a grain of salt. It's for educational purposes and could be seen as a guideline, but it should not be seen as specific to any one's individual circumstance. I do think it's worth taking a moment to talk about Social Security. Now, while it's true if you retire at 35, you likely wouldn't be eligible for Social Security at that point. But if you have worked for at least 10 years and you captured 40 full credits of Social Security, you would be eligible for Social Security once you reached an eligible age. Currently, that is as early as the age of 62. It is worth keeping in mind that Social Security benefits are calculated off an entire working career, factoring in all years of earnings. So if you simply work for a decade or 10 years, but then for the remainder of your eligible working years, you report $0 of earned income to the Social Security Administration, that's actually going to drag down the benefit that you would otherwise be eligible for. The Social Security Administration does have an online calculator, and here I was able to put in 10 years with an income of $100,000 a year with all other years at $0 of earnings. And this gave an estimated benefit of roughly $1,800 a month once this individual reaches full retirement age. So it is worth mentioning that even with an early retirement, you would be eligible for Social Security benefits so long as you have your 40 credits. And once you reach that full retirement age, this would help reduce the amount that you would need to withdraw from your portfolio. It's important to take a moment to talk about the idea of retiring at the age of 35 or any other incredibly early age. I feel like it's actually fairly common nowadays to see people online talking about how they retired and stepped away from the workforce in their 30s. But you might also notice that these exact same people are usually trying to sell you a system on how they made that happen. But the true reality is that most people, and when I say most people, I mean 99.999% of people, are not retiring in their 30s. And that includes those people who are boasting online that they did retire in their 30s. Rather, they are making money in perhaps a non-traditional sense. Maybe it's through a website, maybe it's through blogging, maybe it's through making videos online. These other modalities are generating an income that made it so that they could step away from a traditional job. It's not that they stepped away from a traditional job and are no longer earning an income. It can be a really sexy narrative to say, hey, I retired in my 30s, but it's not true. It's not to say it's not possible, but it's highly unlikely. The odds of being able to work for just 10 years and in that time frame put enough money away and build a nest egg large enough that can support you for the next 60 plus years is highly unlikely. I think the idea of an early retirement is nice, but I also think that putting too much pressure on retiring in, say, your 30s can make it so you fail to enjoy today. You might end up putting so much pressure on yourself to work every single hour of every single day in a job that perhaps you don't enjoy that much and trying to save every last cent of your income. That doesn't sound like a really desirable life either. A more realistic approach would be to have a healthy savings rate and a healthy spending rate so you can still spend and enjoy today as well. I think an early retirement is possible, but in my mind, when I talk about an early retirement, I'm generally thinking about something along the lines of in your 50s, and I think aiming for a retirement in your 50s is entirely doable. When we start shifting and talking about an incredibly early retirement, like something in your 30s, I don't think that's realistic for most people. What are your thoughts on an early retirement? Do you have a particular age that you're aiming for? Leave your thoughts in a comment down below. I post new videos every single week. If you got something at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. I'll see you soon. Bye. Hey guys. An early retirement credits Nope. Mm-mm. It is just particularly enjoy. Don't know what I was going to say. Credit. Nope. Mm-mm. Would be eligible for 40 credits. I don't like that at all. Okay. Mentioning that. Okay. Got this. 40 credits. I give up. That you would be. So it. Jeez, oh, Pete's. So it is. This is the worst thing ever. Okay. So it is 40 credits. I'm done. I am so done. This is ridiculous. Assumptions that were made. Numbers, invested assets, and assumptions being. But the frick being made, I don't know. Okay, so inflation, investment, non-qualified dividends. There's an airplane. Taxes, nope. Then, I don't know. Standard. All years. Whew. Is all, I don't know. Nope. There's any, never gonna make it through this. Never.